Hello everyone, welcome back. We are doing another bit of a deck breakdown here before the challenges coming up. We have the one in Las Vegas, Nevada, September 21st, 22nd, also in Birmingham, United Kingdom. I'm bad with knowing a lot of European countries or locations, so I believe it's United Kingdom, right? Birmingham. But anyway, I'm going to take a look at over the next 2 days or so, maybe 3 days, we'll see how many decks we fit in there. A lot of different decks that we haven't looked at yet, this format, in too much detail, and kind of go through certain parts of them that I like, certain variations that I would recommend if you're planning on playing an archetype like this to play specifically, and kind of go over why. They may differ a little bit from what the stock or kind of de facto versions that you may have seen do well in some events. I've looked at a lot of decks. I've looked at so many deck lists over the course of the past few weeks, trying to understand this format a bit better. I think we're still pretty early on in development, and without really definitive results in any direction other than to play Steel Song. It's gonna be hard pressed for me not to play Steel Song, but we'll see. We're taking a look at some other decks along the way. But let's start off with, speaking of Steel Song, let's talk about the deck you don't want to play against playing Steel Song. So this is the Sisu on Ice. It's been called in many different ways. This is a version of the deck I would recommend playing, and if I were to sleeve up this deck, which I actually do have it sleeved up for practice purposes or a card or two off, I would recommend trying out. So of the new cards this deck got, there's a few, right? Tipo is just another variation of one trip ahead. It does put you down an additional card. That matters less so against the card Whole New World than otherwise, and it is inkable, so when you don't really want to do that or put yourself down some cards, it is just ink, and that's good because this deck has a problem with inking. The other couple cards that are new from this set are Hideaway. Hideaway is a card I decided to play over a card one trip ahead, or not one trip ahead, over additional copies of one trip ahead, but over a card like Cusco to answer items or locations on the other side because it's efficient. It lets me do two things in one turn typically, like answer a threat and also maybe a Queen's Castle, which this card can do just as easily. And the big part of this card, which I like the most out of all of it, and more so than Cusco, is it does function as a similar card to One Trip Ahead if you have a Popsicle or an extra ice block you don't really need, where you just get to ink additionally to get up to 4 for Grabatala or Harem, depending on the matchup. Getting ahead is just that important. So Hideaway doubling as functional copies of One Trip Ahead is kind of nice, and why I do favor it over Cusco. I've tried both in this deck specifically, not as big of a fan as Cusco, but I do like it in other variations of Sapphire decks for sure. Visions of the Future. So Visions of the Future is a card. In Magic, it's a better impulse. Looks at the top 5, puts a card in your hand. Very powerful, helps you find Fishbone Quill pretty consistently. One of the reasons I think you're able to pretty consistently skip parts of the early game now is because you can Visions for specifically answers like Sisu, Fishbone Quill, Brawl, depending on what you need to find. And in the late game, it's one of the best cards just to find the specific answer you need or the threat you want to play out. So those are the new cards in this deck. Some of the cards that I've played in the past myself, this deck, that are not always seen in cards I would recommend trying out, kind of in the face of what we're seeing now. This deck, again, naturally has an advantage, I think, against Steel Song. Fishbone Quill is the card that Steel Song wants to see and play the least out of your opponent. Just being able to utilize all the extra cards for ink and play the bigger threats out that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. But one of the cards I wasn't always a fan of until I played it a bit more and tried it in different matchups, and especially again in this format, Vitalosphere. Vitalosphere giving, for the one cost, given chosen character +2 and rush until end of turn, doesn't always seem that important. It can help, Maui finish off a Queen's Castle, or a Medusa challenge into a second copy of Robin Hood that's in play, or Gramatala hits, anything with 5 health or something like that. But one of the main reasons I like it in the deck is not only is it extra copies of items that are cheap to play for Fabersham to get rid of, but then late in the game, your Tamatoas are also answers to Queen's Castle, which is one of the most problematic cards out of Ruby Amethyst, and one of the matchups this deck can struggle with. But Tamatoa doubling as a 10 cost answer to Queen's Castle, while it does sound like a lot, certain points of the game where you've been able to use Vitalosphere for draw with Fabersham can certainly come up. That, and also with Sisu, the big dragon, you get to help combine, Vitalosphere and play with Sisu to take out castles as well, hopefully being a full clear. A lot of strengths to this deck, a lot of weaknesses too. Getting out aggressive against this deck is one of the ways to make it kind of falter in that way. You'll notice a lack of cards like How Far I'll Go. This deck actually only has 19 uninkables. I think people are incredibly greedy with this deck, as a whole. So I'm pretty, reluctant in my Steel Song deck that has a very much cheaper curve and doesn't really need to get to 6 or 7 or 8 even all the time to play more than 18 uninkables. Yes, a lot of the cards in this deck are acceleration-based cards, Fishbone Quill and other things like that. But in a world where you're trying to be consistent as possible and get as many 2-0s as you can, I think that cutting back on some of the uninkable cards, like how far I'll go, is pretty important. Nothing else to see here as far as the items go. Popsicle, Fishbone Quill, Lucky Dime, Ice Block. I think you only need 3 Ice Blocks, maybe 4. This version is actually only playing 2 copies of Sisu. Another card I kind of want to get into is that from my experience playing against this deck with Steel Song, a lot of the times they're forced in situations where they have to get rid of key items with Flavor Sham to keep up in a lot of ways, meaning that their Ice Blocks had been sacrificed to draw 2 cards just to be able to get to the 8 ink to play Sisu. So my cards that cost or have 3 strength have been pretty safe from Sisu's, and with that being their primary way to sweep the board, it wasn't too hard to overcome in a lot of ways. Yes, Be Prepared can get peated, can get bare necessities, but I think Be Prepared having access to a bunch of them is still very important, and I think better in a mirror match where you sometimes just need more answers to Tamatoa besides just Maleficent Dragon. Sisu is still fine, still playing a couple copies of it. The small Sisu as well is fine. If there are worlds where you can take out cards like Ariel or anything out of the Ruby Amethyst deck, like a Rabbit, before they can bounce it too many times to get too far ahead. Ice Block plus Sisu, the small one, is just fine enough. But I'm not overly sold on Sisu being the best way to start clearing the board. I still do like Be Prepared as the best sweeper in this deck, really. In different versions of this deck in the past, I think preparing for Atlanta, when this mirror match was highly contested, of how to play it and how to get an advantage into it, I played cards like Sword of Truth, which was a little awkward. It bans a 4-cost item that banishes a villain character, but what it does let you do is kind of indefinitely answer Tamatoas in the mirror match, where you get to rebuy it with yourself. I didn't feel like there was enough room in this deck for it this time around, but being able to hide away your opponent's Lucky Dimes is probably one of the key parts of the matchup. I haven't played too many mirrors, mainly because I'm not seriously considering playing this deck myself, but I know a lot of people will. But that, in addition to the Grandma Talas being, I think, 4 of necessary again, I think there was a time where I would see skimming down a bit, but with the potential for Tipo to bring your card count down a little bit too low, you need something in play that replaces itself pretty consistently. Medusa, 3 of it instead of 4, again, to make room for some of the other cards. Visions of the Future kind of helps make that feel not as bad because you can just find it if you need to in the mid-game. But yeah, this deck is fine. I will not play it. I'm not playing Blue-Red. This was not a whole big hijinks for me to get everyone to play Amber Steel and then just switch to Blue-Red. I still would not want to be on that side of the equation because I don't think it's as favored as it may have been previously. Amber Steel is a very scary deck still, and even the best constructed Blue-Red decks can certainly lose to Steel Song, even 2-0 or whatever. But yeah, this is the version I would take if I was playing the deck. It's sleeved up next to me. I've been testing against it and other versions of it as well, but this is the one I've, push come to shove, I'd play this one. The core not really disrupted. Hiram Maui, only 3-12 versus 4 because I had a room for uninkable and the Sisu shift was threatening enough. Also, just the Sisu killing Daisy deck was relevant enough. But yeah, this deck's pretty boring, honestly, to me. It's not much of an exciting deck. We're more just going through all the stock decks that have existed, and this deck really hasn't changed terribly too much since set 3, honestly. But yeah, still powerful, and some of the new cards, Tipo, Hideaway, Visions, all costing 2, which this deck's always lacked 2 drops. Now you have 7 ways to accelerate on turn 2 with 1 jump ahead and Tipo. I'm always going to 1 jump ahead if I can do both, just because 1 jump ahead doesn't put me down a full card because the extra card's coming from my deck, not my hand. But there's some situations, I'm sure, against decks like Maleficence, the 1 cost, 2 lore or Lilos, you want to play a 1-2, and that comes up, but yeah. I'm not going to spend too much time on this deck. I think people have seen enough versions of this deck, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who've spent a lot more time building this deck that may have different takes than I have. This is more just a version of the deck I'm prepared for, or preparing with, and would play if I was playing this deck personally. But yeah, we're going to move on to another deck here, and we're going to go right on to everyone's favorite deck that won't ever die, Ruby Amethyst. I'm calling it Vegas Ruby Amethyst because it's the Ruby Amethyst deck I play in Vegas. So yeah, not too many different cards. The only cards this deck got, I think Nomnot was playing the library. I've been a pretty big anti-library person. And again, that may be strictly speaking from a Steel Song perspective, where I don't think it's very good because the extra cards are never going to come up. Library's fine into blue-red sometimes, but it also can just get taken out pretty easily by Tipo, Maui, or things like that, just to make sure that you have they have a lot of power in play, or Vitalisphere even can pair with Maui. It is fine to recoup some cards, but ultimately I don't think what the game comes down to. The card I do think that is very good for this deck is Elsa, Fifth Spirit. Something I've not seen too many people include, but it is a card in playing Steel Song out of this deck I'm very afraid to play into. There's a lot of ways to just have it be, instant ways to kill late game or mid game Cinderellas that are played to set up shift lines, which otherwise had to be, specifically targeted with Be Prepared or Medusa's Brawls. It also lets you just have aerials, which, sure, Brawl can just kill, but developing an Elsa, which can then either sing friends or just challenge and help keep opposing locations down, is pretty important. Interesting to note with the 1-drops. There's been some consensus back and forward of which ones to play. I'm a big fan of some number of the 1/3s, but never really cutting Churnabox followers. I've seen versions with like 4 Olafs and 4 Minnie Mouses. I've not been too big of a fan. They've most of the time just kind of run out of steam in that sense. In late game, they're pretty bad top decks. Yes, they can be ink, but followers does a really good job of putting some pressure into play, while also demanding some answers from their side if they're going to try and interact with it. But Olaf primarily there to set up a Mim Snake or Fox into Cinderellas, which can be obnoxious to try and develop into. Flynn Rider, while it does get stormed by Cindy pretty easily, it's pretty necessary to beat Ruby Amethyst, I think. Ruby Sapphire. It's pretty necessary to fight those kind of matchups where you have the Churnbox followers, Flynn, Sisu line to really kind of get going, follow up with a rabbit or a castle, and it's going to be pretty quick to end the game. But not too much has changed with this deck. I've gone back to a couple copies of Lady Tremaine over a couple copies of Be King Undisputed, because I want to be able to recur them against blue-red into the mid to late game. I think both cards are equally not ideal against Steel Songs, so I'm going to err on the one that's better against blue-red, which I think is Tremaine. Just the ability to recur it, and it being a threat in of itself. I don't want to get too action or song heavy in the matchup. And I've shaved a copy of Brawl, kind of letting Elsa, and a copy of Maui, which I think is pretty poor into most situations. Obviously against like Robin Hoods and things like that, it's fine, but I think Elsa does a pretty good job of helping fight that. I've seen too many games ended where Maui has just done nothing in the current metagame, and I kind of want to avoid that. Also gives you some answers to cards like Diablo, too, that you may not have otherwise had, or had to rely on your Brawls that may have gotten taken by a bare necessities to help answer things, but still 4 Be Prepared, so you need them to really beat Steel Song any less, and you will certainly not have a good time. I've played into decks that only had 3, and it was very easy to play around them. Of course, I knew they had 3 versus not knowing they had 3 or 4, but still. Yep, crabs, foxes, goats, rabbits, oh my. Not much has changed, but that doesn't mean this deck's any less scary. It's not been my ideal pick always in this format or the previous one to play if I'm trying to 2-0. I think the last time that I felt confident anyway with that would have been set 3 metagame, where I felt like this deck consistently 2-0 people. You'll certainly be able to win many games with this deck, and it's done well in the challenges. Not necessarily my cup of tea to try and fight that fight, because every matchup is a grind. But this one certainly has its moments there where it feels like nothing can really compare to how well it enters the board. But yeah, I'm against Library. I'm for Elsa. That's really all that's changed with this metagame. These decks have really been pretty consistent since they've existed, and I've kind of had me go back and think about what are the most impactful sets in the game, and I feel like set 2 is the most impactful set right now we're seeing still, if we think about it. Set 2 gave us the Mim package, the Goat package, the Mim Snake, Mim Fox, Merlin Crab, Goat Rabbit. Gave us Cindy Storm, Big Cindy, Strength. It gave us, what else did it give us? Harem, Flavor Sham, and Popsicle. Yeah, people think about which set's the most powerful one. They think of set 1 a lot, and that's pretty true. But I think set 2 is just up there, and it may be the most powerful set based off of what we see now in the metagame. But this deck, no exception. Obviously, set 3 gave us Medusa and Queen's Castle, but still. Set 2 has a lot of incredible cards. It's going to be hard to push them out of the metagame, I think. But we'll see. This deck's not changed too much. But I do have one more deck in this video I want to go through. And this is, again, the version I play. This is the version I also have sleeved up. I have some proxies for the extra Mauis, because I don't have 8 Mauis or 8 Medusas, but I do have 8 Be Prepared. So the last deck to kind of get into here, and one I think that if you're going to play this deck I would not expect to do well. And I'm sad to say it because I played this deck through 2 challenges in the last format, and I did really well with them, and I thought it was consistently one of the best decks to be playing. But that's just not the case right now with the metagame. One of the biggest reasons that blue steel has kind of fallen off is because of the threat of cards like Daisy. Daisy is really hard for this deck to answer. Sure, you can say you should be playing cards like Fire the Cannons or more, Captain Hooks, the 4th one, or things like that to really kind of make it easier, or more aggressive with cards like Mickey Mouse to help you ink. But I really found that those all just are poor lines into whatever you expect to play against metagame wise, and to really make that all kind of work out, this deck has to get very lucky. And I've gone as far as to even remove copies of Baboom because I feel like it's not well positioned against most of the field, since everyone at this point is kind of ready for the Cindy Storm metagame because everyone's afraid of Steel Song. Baboom's gotten a lot worse in how it plays out most of the time. Of note, this deck does play Tipo, and I think this is the best Tipo deck. Tipo is very good against the card Whole New World, and also very good with it. Tipo is not great because it often makes it so that you have to go down a full card to get the same effect you'd have against a 1-jump ahead, but being able to develop a body in the same fashion you would play 1-jump ahead most of the time, when you don't care that you're going out an extra card because Whole New World's going to reset that card count. It's been very good at combining with 1-jump ahead, giving you 11 acceleration pieces between Fishbone Quill, 1-jump ahead, Tipo. I've tried Visions in this deck to look at top 5 to find Whole New Worlds. It's not really been how it's played out for me. I feel like Harem Flavor Sham in conjunction with playing a Whole New World and essentially a 52 card deck with Popsicle and Fortisphere being cheap cantrips means it's pretty consistent still. Grammatala's come back into the fold a bit for me, just to help facilitate a long game of Zeus. It's a reasonable body that can actually just check a Naveen, honestly. It's why it's there. And I wasn't previously playing Smee and Hook. I was playing Cyclops and Babooms in those slots. I think you need to be a bit more aggressive now and try and end the game. One of the biggest cards this deck actually struggles with is Pete. This deck is all about setting up giant swing turns with Whole New World and Singers, and Pete has kind of wrecked my day more than once to where I was a little bit too frustrated trying to play it. You'll see here in this deck, you'll see Cusco as opposed to seeing Hideaway. One of the main reasons is Whole New World. You want to Singer and play. And this deck doesn't really lack the ability to develop early characters. You can play Smee and Hook and 1-jump ahead Tipo, and you don't really need the functional potential of having extra copies of 1-jump ahead by hitting your own Popsicle or Fortisphere. You more so want Singers in play. And I often will hit my own things with Cusco here. Being able to hit Popsicle or Fortisphere pretty consistently to go from 6 to 8 is a great piece of acceleration. It lets you go Cusco on turn 4 with the Fishbone Quill in a situation where you may go Popsicle into Mr. Smee into Fishbone Quill, and then on turn 4 you go Cusco, ink my Popsicle. The turn after that, seeing Whole New World, and with just 1 ink, not even having to use the Fishbone Quill, you've got to play Tamatoa. So on turn 5 Tamatoa is pretty strong. Tinkerbell Swords obviously have been mainstays for this deck for quite a while. Let It Go is a card that's kind of been pushed out. It's pretty poor into Amber Steel, bad against Pete. It's very good, of course, to answer opposing Tamatoas, but this deck I think is just too poor into Red-Blue now. I thought last format it was serviceable because you wouldn't have to play certain cards. You could get away with playing not as many early lore characters and be more focused on developing a mid to late game strategy and make your Tamatoas even better. But I feel like that's not possible right now just because I think that previously this deck was only at 50-50 at best against Amber Steel Songs, but now it's just significantly worse because of Naveen mostly and Pete. So yeah. Zeus is to pair with Tala's, having more access to that kind of removal, since again I think that Baboom is a lot worse since the early threats are going to have 3 health most of the time, not really 2. Our main threat isn't Flynn anymore, it's Cinderella, which costs half as much as Flynn, and Ariel and things like that, and Naveen also just getting around Baboom altogether makes it kind of awkward. But yeah, most of the deck's not really changed too much. I've tried different versions with Mufasa as the top end, ran into too many uninkables a lot of times. Mufasa was very strong, but ran into issues getting peated, because normally your big turn is involved playing a bunch of threats and a song or two. Mufasa is a card I want to keep experimenting with, but it's been hard to find the right place to make it work. Honestly, its biggest issue is it's a slow blue card that also costs the same as Tamatoa in decks that are usually also playing Popsicle, and there's a couple other 8s that it's actually competing with. in other decks, like against like Blur Pull. I think Elsa might be better and things like that. It's hard to make, figure out the exact room for cards like Mufasa, but it is a powerful card. But if you're going to have any chance of beating Blue Red with this deck, I think this is the version you have to take. And again, I don't really recommend this one too much. It's more of this is where I'm at with it and where I've tried to get to, because I think the matchup against Amber Steel Songs is a lot worse than it used to be. And it was only ever okay at best. But yeah, this is the deck. Cogsworth's still great. You can still steal plenty of games with Cogsworth and Tinkerbells and things like that in that matchup. But when we're playing 3 copies of Cinderella Stouthearted, Cogsworth doesn't seem as good as it once was, where it just gets eaten for free. And again, the concession of Captain Hooks, Mistress Me, and T-Pose are really just because of Daisy Duck and other aggressive strategies that are trying to get under you. But no, it's a deck I wish to revisit at some point. Right now, I don't think it's right for Las Vegas, but if I were to play it, this would be the version I'd be taking with me. Again, it's not quite there, but I'm sure someone more dedicated than I in this vein would have ways to counteract. And yeah, I mean, it got a lot of tools as far as Cusco and Tipo, but that's not enough to really feel like it got the same kind of power level of Naveen and Pete. Tried Pete's in this deck too. It was good in the Mufasa versions, but again, kind of fell prey to Blue Red having Ice Block as Medusa being able to answer my Mufasas pretty handily, and that was just not the case with Tamatoa, so a little bit harder. But Mufasa did work really well with Lucky Dime, letting you play it and activate it in the same turn pretty sufficiently after the turn you play it, so it was a huge lore swing, but I think Tamatoa is ultimately the better threat. But thanks again, everyone, for tuning into this one. I know these are going to be shorter than the normal deep dives with Steel Song, but we have probably another one here, and then Wednesday go through a couple of versions of decks I'm much more likely to play. These are kind of just more of the metagame you're looking into and going to walk into. And tomorrow we're going to have 3 different decks. None of them are going to be blue, I don't believe. They're all going to be... Nope, not going to be blue. So more decks to come. Look for those tomorrow being posted around the same time. But until next time, thanks for watching.